I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Nelson Abbey and I'm a writer. I write for a range of publications, including The Voice, The Evening Standard, and whoever else wants to actually publish my work. So I'm here today and I'll be chairing this event. And as we stated when we started out, we are here to discuss drugs, race, and growing up. And I'll put into a bit more context. As the video actually stated, as the video highlighted, and our speakers will also highlight too, as time has gone on, and we've reached a stage right now where things are actually are at a stage of utter ridiculousness, where drug policy is known not to work, is known to criminalise entire communities, is known to have helped the prison population, both in our country over here and in other countries, especially Western countries, helped prison populations actually peak. Mexico has gone parts of Mexico has gone pretty much insane as a result of drug policy. So the thinking behind today's debate is looking at not just the drugs, but looking at drug policy itself and trying to find out what the lesser of the two evils are. And I suspect if this narrative is not new to you, then pretty much you probably have already come to arrive at some form of conclusion. And also looking at ways in which we can actually perhaps try and win or turn the debate into a different direction, where certain things, certain elements, or certain discussions surrounding drugs and drug policy, especially in relation to pretty much marginalised and criminalised communities, can be discussed. Our first speaker for this evening is Viv Ahmun. I know Viv fairly well. I know Viv fairly well, and I won't use that as an excuse not to give him a great introduction. But Viv is absolutely a very great guy. I would describe him as somebody who has actually worked tirelessly within London, and across the country, on a range of subjects, in terms of mentoring children, in terms of mentoring troubled children, especially going to some of the most difficult spots within the country. Viv has, you name it, Viv has actually done it. Viv sits on a range of boards, including the London Probation Board too, and also Viv is a private entrepreneur as well as a social entrepreneur too. So he employs over 300 people in his company, in which he's a managing director, or involved. He's also the managing director of another company called Corpland. So he's a busy man, and we're very grateful for your time this evening. Viv, 10 minutes for you.
Thank you. Thank you. No applause? On this chilly Thursday night. I think, I was thinking very hard about how to approach this, and I decided that I didn't want to talk about drugs specifically. I wanted to just take a few minutes to talk about my travel and how that process has brought me to this point, and my current observations around what's taking place, and then the drugs element will be a part of that. I set up Involve 20 years ago now. It's a national organisation. It started out obviously as a very local initiative, providing drugs treatment. It was a community drugs team. I won't go into that in any real detail. And I noticed very quickly that the young people were actively involved in drugs, but they weren't being picked up by the government, and weren't being picked up by other professionals, teachers and so on and so forth. And to all intents and purposes, young people didn't use drugs at that point, and nor did black people. Then, through the work that we did, we became more and more aware of the extent to which young people were using drugs in order to manage their own distress, frustration, trauma, for a whole range of related things. And around 1983, got involved in the development of stimulant services, primarily crack cocaine, but a whole range of designer drugs, as they were described at the time. And for me, I was still very naive. I felt that it was important to simply establish services to treat the addiction, the dependence. I saw it in those very simple terms, whether it be young people or adults from different sections of the community. And so I spent a good chunk of time focusing on that in a very purist way, which is in fact how the drugs sector still is today. Very focused on dealing with the symptoms, not dealing with the broader context, as the film touched on. I left Involve 3 years ago, the organisation that I had painfully and lovingly developed, because, and at that time our turnover was 8.5 million, and actually I just negotiated a merger with 2 other organisations in Wales and Scotland to take us up to about 20 million. I walked away from it because I realised that providing drugs treatment services wasn't actually addressing the issue at all, and not even beginning to, for 2 reasons. It's a contract-driven culture, so we had to bid for the contracts. We had absolutely no involvement in how those contracts were designed, even though we were the experts. I remember one occasion, one of the commissioners actually going up onto the internet and finding bits and pieces of information to use to then design the specification for a contract that was then subsequently tendered. We would secure the contract and have to deliver those contracts as they were initially designed. There would be no scope for us to develop and expand on that. And I think it's probably on the back of the Feltham contract. It took me 4 years to win that contract. I really wanted that contract because of Feltham and its deeply dysfunctional history. It took me 4 years to get hold of that contract. And we had the contract for 4 years. And during that time, we did absolutely nothing of any worth in there, other than earn money for the organisation. And I think it was probably on the back of that that I realised that I needed to get out of that industry and deal with and get to grips with some of the underlying issues. And this is what I want to get to now. If we're talking about young people, we know that the young people will use drugs for 2 key reasons. One, to kill time, so to make their lives more entertaining and more bearable. 2, to make money. It's really important. Let me deal with the second one first. As it stands at the moment, unemployment amongst black people under 21 in this country is running at about 58%, possibly more than that. 58%, that's more than half of the black youth in this country who are unemployed and have absolutely nothing to do. If we take Haringey as a borough, we know that 75% of youth provision has been cut. These individuals are stop and searched on a serial basis. They are not given the opportunity to generate income in a meaningful way because they're disproportionately excluded from school. So they're left with no choice but to go to the illicit market in order to make a living. That's the narrative on the street. So because they're getting into an industry that is illegal, they're automatically criminalized. Because they're getting into an industry that isn't regulated in the way that mainstream industries are, they inevitably get into violence in order to manage their business within a very competitive industry. Given, and I'm just dealing with this country specifically, that Britain is in a decline, this situation is only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse because they are in the process of privatising the few services that were in the hands of statutory organisations and third sector organisations. I had a meeting with one of the deputy commissioners in Scotland Yard a year ago, and he said to me, it was a private meeting, they do like private secret meetings. He said to me, Viv, what are you doing within the black community? And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, don't you realise the implications of a big society? And I said, well, it's about communities doing more for themselves. He said, no, it's the privatisation of services. And within a year to 2 years, the black third sector won't exist anymore unless they understand what's taking place through the localism bill and what they're describing as social impact bonds, community impact bonds, if they don't realise that organisations like Serco and others, multi-billion pound organisations like that, will be coming in and taking over their services, they'll wake up one night and realise that there's no provision for them, which will only compound what we've been talking about. Skunk weed is out there and used by young people to kill time, to manage their frustration and their anger. They're self-medicating. It's one way of minimising the extent to which they feel inclined to play out their aggression on others, as well as on themselves. So, when we talk about the drugs policy, for me, it's much wider than that. It's a dysfunctional social policy that deliberately compartmentalizes the symptoms. So whether it be mental health, whether it be drugs use, whether it be domestic violence, whether it be poor education, it compartmentalizes the symptoms in order to perpetuate the control. Anyone I've ever spoken to, whether it be Ian Duncan Smith or somebody within the Labour Party or any other individual in senior government or within the police force, has acknowledged that the common sense approach would be a public health approach that ensures services are systemic, they don't operate in isolation, and it's focused on meeting the needs of the individual. There has to be an economic dimension to that invariably, because if communities are deprived, if there is no hope and no opportunity for individuals, then they will seek to create that hope and opportunity for themselves. I remember when they established the National Offender Management System, they talked about end-to-end provision, they talked about an individual being supported all the way through the system, out the other end by one individual, recognising that that was the best approach. It never happened. It was never realised, and in fact, NOMS is now in the process of being dismantled. So we're dealing with a situation where no one's interested in changing the way things are. What they're interested in doing is further bastardising and demonising those communities that are already oppressed and abused. They use the state media in order to do that, and we saw that play out through the recent disturbances. Some people refer to them as or riots or civil unrest, however you describe it. It's clear that the only winner out of that process will be the individuals who are commissioned in to rebuild these areas, and it won't be the individuals that live in it. And the private companies that are also commissioned to come in and deliver the services to these communities for a profit. So I want to conclude there by saying that what I'm very clear about now is that it's not even about the drugs policy or any other specific policy. It's about the extent to which this government and governments around the world will redouble their efforts to control those poor and economically deprived communities.
Following on from that, Viv, in your utopia, in a world in which Viv Ahmun ruled the world, what would the drug policy look like? What would be drug policy?
Well, again, I think a report came out last week and it said, let me get this right, a young person dies from abuse every 5 hours. So every 5 hours, a young person's being killed as a result of abuse. The Wave Trust produced a report in 2005, which talked about early childhood trauma and the extent to which that adversely impacts a child and plays out through their lives. For me, I would be focusing on, again, I'd be talking about a public health approach that focused on meeting the needs of the young people in our community within their family. So you couldn't meet the needs of...
Can I ask you to break down what you mean by a public health approach?
Yeah. A public health approach, first and foremost, recognises the need for services to be genuinely interlinked. It has to be systemic, and it has to start from the beginning, as far upstream as possible, which again for me means within the home, within the family, within the community. So your services would be delivered at that point in order to address or reduce the extent to which we see the dysfunctionality playing out later on in a young person's life. And I tend to, definitely when I'm designing services, look at it from the standpoint of an individual going through this system and experiencing that system. So we're talking about a young person, young people in deprived areas, often in a home where there are adults who are experiencing all kinds of distress, whether it be mental health, a whole range of other issues, being exposed to violence, not getting any support around that, and then taking that trauma that they're experiencing into the education system, and then as a result of that, being labelled and then excluded, and then eventually ended up within the criminal justice system. At some point, they may develop a mental health issue. That mental health issue will only be picked up once they're picked up within the criminal justice system. So I'm saying, when we're talking about a public health approach, a recognition of the need to understand what's going on the health side, what's going on from the education side, and what's taking place within the home, and all of those strands communicating with each other on an ongoing basis around the individual and the family.
Splendid. Thank you very much, Viv Ahmun. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Nelson Abbey and I'm a writer. I write for a range of publications, including The Voice, The Evening Standard, and whoever else wants to actually publish my work. So I'm here today and I'll be chairing this event. And as we stated when we started out, we are here to discuss drugs, race, and growing up. And I'll put into a bit more context. As the video actually stated, as the video highlighted, and our speakers will also highlight too, I suspect if this narrative is not new to you, then pretty much you probably have already come to arrive at some form of conclusion. And also looking at ways in which we can actually perhaps try and win or turn the debate into a different direction, where certain things, certain elements, or certain discussions surrounding drugs and drug policy, especially in relation to pretty much marginalised and criminalised communities, can be discussed. Our first speaker for this evening is Viv Ahmun. I know Viv fairly well. I know Viv fairly well, and I won't use that as an excuse not to give him a great introduction. But Viv is absolutely a very great guy. I would describe him as somebody who has actually worked tirelessly within London, and across the country on a range of subjects, in terms of mentoring children, in terms of mentoring troubled children, especially going to some of the most difficult spots within the country. Viv has, you name it, Viv has actually done it. Viv sits on a range of boards, including the London Probation Board too, and also Viv is a private entrepreneur as well as a social entrepreneur too. So he employs over 300 people in his company, in which he's a managing director, or involved. He's also the managing director of another company called Corpland. So he's a busy man, and we're very grateful for your time this evening. Viv, 10 minutes for you.
Thank you. Thank you. No applause? On this chilly Thursday night. I think, I was thinking very hard about how to approach this, and
as time has gone on, and we've reached a stage right now where things are actually are at a stage of utter ridiculousness, where drug policy is known not to work, is known to criminalise entire communities, is known to have helped the prison population, both in our country over here and in other countries, especially Western countries, helped prison populations actually peak. Mexico has gone parts of Mexico has gone pretty much insane as a result of drug policy. So the thinking behind today's debate is looking at not just the drugs, but looking at drug policy itself and trying to find out what the lesser of the two evils are.